Hi everyone, and welcome to the webinar Culture as Strategy for Growth, co-organized by Oslo Business Forum and Nordic Business Forum. My name is Christopher. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Oslo Business Forum, and I have the honor of moderating today's webinar. Today, we are so fortunate to be digging into a variety of perspectives related to culture. And firstly, we are going to hear from Epsend Steinsrud, the National Director of Dfind Norway. Dfind is a part of Randstad Group, the largest HR company in the world. And I know that Epsend has a clear message today to all employers out there, that the war of talents has never been tougher, and that the power balance has shifted in favor of the talents. And therefore, as an employer, you will need to design a great culture in order to attract and retain the best talents. I'm looking forward to hear more about that. After Epsend, we will hear from Annicken in Corporate Spring. Annicken is an expert in the field of culture change, high-performing teams, and leadership. And Annicken advises startup founders and Fortune 500 executives on how to build thriving cultures and secure business success in the new world of work. Finally, at the end of the webinar, we will summarize the key takeaways and learning points together with Epsend, so make sure you stick to the end. The hashtags for today are OB Forum 2021 and NB Forum 2021. Share a quote on Twitter, share a picture from where you're watching from on Instagram, or share your learning point on LinkedIn. Just a few examples on how you can share these hashtags for today's webinars. You can also ask questions directly through Slido. So you'll find Slido either by the QR code on the screen, or you can find it on the right side next to the live stream. Remember also to upvote the best questions, so we'll find the best questions to Annicken and Epsend. So we were thinking that we could try it right away, so we actually have a question for you at home. So what do you see as most important to create a good culture? You can apply with one word into Slido. So what do you see as most important to create a good culture? Write one word in Slido. Let's see if we get some responses. You can see leadership. A lot of you have written leadership. Trust. Trust is very important. Clarity. Empathy. We have transparency. Openness. Yeah, I think consistency. I think many of these words are really important in order to create a good culture. So that's a good start. Thank you so much. Now it's time to hear from Epsend Steinsrud, the National Director of Dfind Norway. Epsend, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Christopher, and thank you very much to everyone watching. And it's really great to be here with you today. I will tell you something about what we see in the markets, what we see is going on at the moment, and I will also give you some insights to how you can attract and retain the talents you need for your organization to grow in the future. Let's start by the situation we see now. To put it clearly to you, there's a strong evidence that there's a battle for the talents. We see it in many regions around the world, and we see it in more and more professions, that it's hard to get the talent you need, but it's also important to keep the talents you already have. And when I talk about talents, I talk about talents in a broad perspective. This is not about age, it's not about gender, it's not about where, but talents is the people you need to do your strategy. So be aware, there's a battle out there. That's why you should listen today, because we have some solutions to keep those people on board and to get the new people on board. So what is the main thing you have to care about? Well, to be honest, to try to fit everything to everybody, to be the most attractive for everyone, is not possible. You have to choose where to play and how to win. This is also the same reason for choosing who do you want to attract and how do you attract them, but also how do you keep the people you already have on board. I will give you some insights because we do this every year in Randstad around the world. We ask a huge number of people, approximately 190,000 people in 34 markets on the question, what do you look for in an attractive employer? This research we have done for 21 years. So we can follow trends, but we can also see changes during, for example, the situation we have had the last year with COVID. What's interesting, and I will come back to this quite soon, what's interesting is that we see some clear trends that differ between regions. We see some clear trends that differ per year due to the market situations, but we also see something that stays quite stable through the changes in the market and through different regions. Let's start with what the world looks for, if we look at the world as a total. And this is answers from what we call the working age population, people in the working age. And what they see and what they say is that when they want to attract or when they want to be attracted by an employer, this is what they look for, the main drivers. I call it drivers. On the 5th place in the world is career progression. That's something that the world of talents look for when choosing an employer. On the 4th place, they look at pleasant work atmosphere. And that's quite close to what we talk about when we talk about culture, right? They also have this year been quite focused on job security. Not strange in the situation we have had the last year. But also on the 2nd place, work-life balance. And that is maybe something you didn't know about the world of work. You think it's some areas of the world, but this is quite important for the whole population we have asked. And finally, the number one driver for choosing an employer in the world is attractive salary and benefits. Now, I'm working mostly with clients in Norway. We have colleagues, and I have colleagues working around the world with clients. But if we want to work with the people in Norway, we see some differences from this world 5 top drivers. I will show you the Norwegian situation. In Norway, the top 5 is, number 5 is job security. This one you saw on the global one, but it's not that important in Norway. Then there's a new driver coming up, and that's interesting job content. We didn't see that in the world, but we see it in Norway. That's important for those talents in Norway. We also see that attractive salary and benefits are important, but it's not number one reason for choosing an employer or what you look for in an employer. Now looking at the top 2 drivers, you will see some interesting new things that we didn't see in the global situation. Training. In Norway, and we see this also in other countries, in Norway, good training is really important for the talents. And in a situation during the last 1.5 years where we have been sitting at home, this is a challenging one, but it's important. And then you ask, what is the number one then? The number one driver for Norwegian working age people, I call them talents, is pleasant work atmosphere. That's more important than attractive salaries and benefits we saw in the world. So now I have a nice bridging to what we will talk about, because pleasant work atmosphere is very closely related to the next topic that Annicken is going to talk about, culture. So please think about how you can match these drivers with what you hear from Annicken, and I will summarize a little bit later. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Espen. It is really interesting to get all the insights and the data from Randstad and Dfind on this subject. And I got a few tips on what we can do in Oslo Business Forum as well. Now it's time to hear from Annicken in Corporate Spring. She has actually written a book about this subject as well, A Fly Butterfly, which I recommend you to check out. But ladies and gentlemen, the culture as strategy for growth, Annicken.
Thank you so much, Christopher. I am thrilled to be here. Hello, everyone. Today we're going to talk about culture, which is something that I'm very passionate about and is very close to my heart, and which I've actually been working with for the last 20 years. And we're going to talk about culture in the context of how to make it a strategy for growth. So I'm going to talk about why this is really good for your business, to make your culture a strategy for growth. I'm going to talk about three mistakes that managers often make when they are trying to change culture. And then finally, I'm going to talk and share with you a model, actually a roadmap, so to speak, that can help you practically and strategically work with your culture. But before we go there, let's have a little look on what is happening in the world right now. We're going to take a 10,000-foot perspective for a second. And the last 10 to 15 years, we have seen how the world has become more and more global, digitized. There's huge demographic changes going on. And, well, the last 18 months, I think we all can aware there has been some pretty big changes in the world as well. We have had a global pandemic. So with that, I think we all can agree that shift happens, change happens, and we got to deal with it. And the work world needs to deal with it, and companies need to deal with it. So we'll look at some of the trends that we see happening in this new world of work. And this has been going on for quite some time, but it has accelerated during the pandemic. One is how organizations are organized. Well, we have like typical hierarchical organizations are more and more moving towards what we call a team of teams. So you have more autonomous teams because they can move faster, they're closer to the customer, and can make faster decisions. You also see a big shift in how leaders lead. So the old-fashioned way, which we call command and control, where the boss was on the top and had all the answers and the rest should just follow. Well, that doesn't really work anymore in this new world of work. Leadership is so much more about engaging and empowering people. Then we also see that there has become a new awareness around the human side of business. Where we used to talk about people at work as like human resources, we now talk about this as human beings. And that is a big mindset shift as well. And then, of course, something that I think most business leaders out there are a little bit pulling their hair about, and that is, how are we going to deal with this new hybrid work situation? So going from mostly in office to remote and now slowly getting into the hybrid. What does that look like? And how does that impact the way we work? And that is also why the fifth trend we're seeing is culture, because the four others are actually making culture even more relevant to talk about, because how does this influence culture? So let's take a little second just to talk about how I define culture here. So it's basically how you work together. It's how you collaborate, how you communicate, innovate, solve problems, and how you treat each other. And not to forget, treat your customers as well. So basically culture, it determines how things get done. But when we talk about culture as a strategy, we talk about consciously and deliberately building the kind of culture and strengthen the kind of culture that you need in order to secure your business success. So we can basically say there are two ways that you can approach your culture. So one is to do it consciously. And that is to say, okay, so where are we heading? What's our vision? What's our purpose? What's our goal? What kind of culture do we need to build in order to reach that goal? And we have the other way, which is unconsciously. And that's basically doing nothing and kind of just letting it evolve and develop by chance. And strangely enough, that is the approach that most companies have been taking up to now. And I'm afraid this you can see this in what I call some brutal facts. What is the current situation in the work world right now? Well, let's have a little look at culture. So this is from PwC's Global Culture Survey in 2021. They asked the executives, so do you prioritize culture? Do you think culture is important? Yes, said 67% of the executives. We prioritize culture. But you know what? Only 46% of the employees agreed with that. Then we said, do you have a great culture? 67% of the executives said, yes, we do. But only 41% of the employees agreed. Then, when it comes to engagement, year after year after year, Gallup has asked people how they feel about their jobs. And year after year, it turns out people don't feel that great about their jobs. And it hasn't really changed that much. So approximately 80% of the global work population say they are not engaged in their jobs. And then, you remember what Espen talked about, the war of talent? Well, it's real. 40% of the workforce actually say they consider leaving their employer this year. And the reason they want to leave is they are discontent with leadership, culture, and the employee experience. The fact that 80% of the global workforce are disengaged and knowing the business benefits, which I will come back to in a little while, for having engaged teams, Gallup has estimated that the global disengagement costs companies around the world $7 trillion. And then finally, on the brutal facts, talk about Mind the Gap. In a recent survey of millennials and Gen Zs from Deloitte, they say what they want is purposeful jobs, work-life balance, flexible work practices, emotional and mental well-being. But most say they don't experience that today. And you know what? In 2025, millennials and Gen Zs, which basically are people born after 1981, they will make up 75% of the workforce. So, yes, we need to pay attention. But not only because of that, but also because of the immense business benefits of actually working strategically with your culture. And when I say working strategically with your culture, I talk about creating the right kind of culture that actually inspires people to give their very best, and that will lead to high performance. So when you're able to do that and work strategically with it and create these highly engaged organizations, these are some of the benefits you can expect. 50% improvement in employee retention, because people don't want to leave when they enjoy their jobs, right? 20% higher customer satisfaction, 18% better business performance, and 23% higher profitability, according to Gallup. And actually, there's so many benefits, I couldn't put it all in one slide, so I got one more slide for you, and that is 3 times higher shareholder revenue, shareholder return, sorry. They are also 5 times more likely to change. And if we know something we all need to be able to and adapt to and embrace these days, it is change. There are 73% less burnout among people who's in cultures that are engaged and happy where they work. And you know what? People are also 29% happier with their lives. This is according to Center for Neuroeconomic Studies. So there's all these benefits and reasons why you would want to make culture a strategy for growth. So why don't more people do it? You know what? I have a theory. Because most people haven't really learned, 1, why it's so important, and 2, how to do it. And actually, we might even have learned things that isn't really beneficial and doesn't really create these kind of high-performing cultures. So Yoda said wisely, you must unlearn what you have learned. And there's one thing I needed to unlearn. So I don't know about you guys, but when I studied psychology and change management at Stockholm University in mid-90s, we learned about something called the burning platform. The burning platform, that was something that people said, if you want to create change, you got to scare people, because if you don't change, you got to lose your job, or we're going to fail, or the company is going to go bankrupt. That was like how they thought this is the best way to motivate for change. But neuroscience and management the studies show that when people get scared, they don't change. They actually have this natural reaction freeze or flee or fight. So actually, instead of scaring people to change, we have to inspire them for change. And the best way to inspire people for change is to explain why. Why do we need to change? So that is number one, that a lot of leaders actually think that scaring people is a good way to change the culture. If we don't do that, then this will happen. But instead, create a story, create a narrative, create something inspiring, and explain why is this culture change so important for us, and want people to be part of it. The other one is a lot of leaders tend to talk to people and not with people. So there's a lot of great strategies. So how do you go out and talk about this and this and that? And you can have all hands meetings and you can have emails and all that. But it turns out if people are just talked to and not talked with, it's very hard for them to engage in the changes that's needed. So that is why engagement is actually, or engage is a verb. So if you want to engage people, have engaged people, you need to engage with them. So that is number two, that we see leaders when they start talking with people and listening to people, people will also be much more inclined to be part of the change. And finally, the very classical and maybe the most normal one. Any of you guys out there try this with your kids to say like, well, do as I say, not as I do. Well, that doesn't really work, does it? Well, it doesn't work when you want to change culture either. So if you're a leader and you want to change your organization and think others are going to change, but you're not willing to change, well, it simply won't work. So you always have to start with yourself and see, what can I do differently? How can I change? Because as a leader, you're a role model and people will follow your lead. So these are the three very normal mistakes that if we're aware of them, we can actually be much more effective in driving culture change. Okay, so let's go a little bit like, how do you actually then strategically and consciously create culture? So this is one simple model, which I think many people tend to forget, to see how crucial it is to understand that what we value, what we deem important, it shapes the way we think. And the way we think, that shapes what we do. And what we do becomes the culture. So being clear about what you value, and a lot of companies have values, but make sure they are real, not just on the poster on the wall, but something people truly understand and believe in, because it will shape the way they work. So this is one kind of simple way to start being a bit more aware and conscious about the culture. But now I'm going to show you something that is a bit more comprehensive, but also a lot more effective. Because what you want to do, you don't want to create any culture. You want to create the right kind of culture, the kind of culture that secures your business success, right? So this is a model. I call it the corporate spring model. I have been working with this for many years, and my team and I have been working with hundreds of teams around the world, guiding them through that and coaching them through this model, and using it as a tool to discuss the things that really drive performance the most. So if you look at it and you think about Maslow's hierarchies of needs, kind of, you have at the bottom, you have the basics, the physiological needs, and then on the top, you have self-actualization. Well, here, the basics is like you need to have a purpose. Everyone needs to know, why do you come to work in the morning? What are we here to do? The other is to have a strong sense of identity, a sense of belonging. I belong here. I'm part of this group. And the third one is to have trust and psychological safety. So when you have these, then you can build on and go talk about mindsets and people understanding they can choose their mindset. And the ultimate is passion and joy. So when you get to that place, that's where people really look forward to come to work in the morning and enjoy what they do. That is when you achieve what we call the high-performing team status. That's where you are able to get there. And this is not something I just came up with because I think it's a really good idea. This is actually based on science, neuroscience, social psychology, behavioral economics. And we have been working with startup companies with it and huge, Fortune 500 companies. And what's amazing about this model is that it works everywhere because it's about humans. It's about human needs and how do we, how are we motivated and how do we best work together in order to be able to do what we're here to do. But of course, this doesn't happen just in a vacuum. So if you see around this model, we have leadership. So leaders, how they show up, the role models, how they lead, but also self-leadership is extremely important in this. And then you have the way you collaborate. How do you work together as a team and support each other around each and one of these building blocks? And then how do you communicate? So basically this model, it is everything influences everything. So if you kind of start working on one of them, the others might be influenced, right? So having all of these in mind at the same time, it is one way, but the other one is also to hone in on certain ones that you think is going to be most crucial for you right now. And I also want to share one more model, which I think a lot of companies forget when they talk about culture, because sometimes I hear people talk about culture as this feel-good thing. And of course, that might be part of it, or it is part of it, because if you feel passionate and joyful and there's trust, of course, that will feel good, right? But it's more than that. It's so much more than that, because it is a way of working together. But in order to make that sustainable, it also has to be strengthened and reinforced by the structure. So, for example, if you want to have an empowered culture and saying, people, we trust you, we want you to be able to make decisions, you can't have a lot of rigid control mechanisms that hold people back and doesn't make it possible to make decisions or take action, if you understand. So I just want to share that this is also an important thing to do. And it can look a little bit overwhelming, and this is something you can just use as a guide to work with over time, but it is extremely helpful because it gives you a roadmap to work with it strategically and structurally. And over time, you will see how this can impact the way people feel and the way they work together. So now I just quickly go through each and one of these building blocks. And what I would like you to do now is to think, okay, when you think about these three drivers, for each and one of these building blocks, what does this mean for my leadership role? What can I do more of or less of? How can we collaborate to make this happen and be part of our culture? And how do we need to communicate that? So for each one, please just have that in mind as I go through each and one of them. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about purpose. So purpose, that is such a fundamental thing when we talk about creating high-performing cultures. Because if people feel that what they do matters, that it's important, they will give their best. So basically, you can say purpose is your reason for existing, but it's also something that people say, this is why I get up in the morning. And it turns out that people are extremely intrinsically motivated, meaning meaningful work makes a huge difference in how people feel. And the chances that they will perform better is overwhelming when you look at the research. Identity is another of the building blocks, which is also very important to have consciously talk about and think about, what are our values? What do we believe in? What do we have in common? To create this sense of belonging. Belonging turns out to be one very strong human need that we have. And it's all the way back on the savannah when we were part of a tribe. And if we weren't part of a tribe, that was actually, it was dangerous. We could die. Well, our bodies, they can still kind of react almost similarly and get really scared and afraid if they don't feel like we belong somewhere. So feeling of belonging is so important. And that is how you include people. How do you treat people? It is about the social life, the camaraderie, to being kind and friendly. And so people say, I belong with these people. So that is another fundamental human need that really impacts the way people perform. The third one is trust. I don't know if you ever tried this trust fall, not to recommend it actually, but it illustrates well the fact that someone has my back, that feeling of, you know what, I am psychologically safe here. I can be myself at work. People are kind and supportive. Kindness is underestimated as an ingredient in the work life, because if people feel safe and that people are kind to each other, they can focus on doing a great job. They don't have to be afraid and look over their shoulder and be nervous to make mistakes, but actually innovate and create. So having a conscious approach to that as well, and talk about what is it, what creates trust, what creates distrust, how can we as a team together create this kind of environment? So basically, all these building blocks are things you can get together as a team and talk about and have conversations around and agree how would you and we like to do it here in our team, in our company, in our organization. So let's go up one more on the model that I shared with you, the corporate spring model, and talk a little bit about what we call growth mindset. So this is a kind of a big building block because it talks about the fact that we as human beings actually have this amazing strength that we can choose our mindset. But very many people don't really think about that, or maybe not even aware of it. And just being aware that you have these abilities, you have the ability to change. What does that look like? How does it feel? How do you help yourself and help your team to handle changes? You have the ability to respond. If something happens to you, from the moment it happens to your respond, you have a little window of 2 seconds where you actually deliberately can make a choice. Do I now want to point finger and say this is stupid, or do I want to point fingers at myself and say, what can I do about it? Just knowing this, understanding this is a huge strength, individually and collectively. And then we have what you talk about, growth ability. And that is like our ability to learn new things and try new things and be the best version of ourselves. But this is also something we need to deliberately want to do. So neuroscience actually shows that our brains are really, really lazy. So our brains, they like to not have a lot of challenges because it's designed to keep us safe and keep us, where we are. So anything that is a big change or a reaction or a growth opportunity, we need to actively pursue it. So this is interesting when you look at the psychologists of teams, that sometimes we think that people are negative, and sometimes we can just say their brains are a bit lazy because you're not making an effort to look for a solution. So that's a little language for you, but it's a whole philosophy and a way of working that is really powerful when you start embracing that. And there's the saying, change your thoughts and you change your world, and that is so true. Then we come to the top of this model, the pyramid, and that is passion. And passion, that is, that's what creates amazing things. And nothing of all these examples here would have happened without passion. Because passion, that fuels us, it gives us energy, it makes us do that extra that we didn't even think we could do. But you know what? Passion can be a two-edged sword, because if it's only passion, it can only almost be like blindly passion. You need to actually combine passion with joy. Because when you have joy and passion, that is when the magic happens. That is when you, as a team, as people, I start shining because you're having fun and you're doing what you love doing. And the combination of that is truly what makes up that very unique, highly engaged cultures that I explained earlier. Only 20% of the global population say they are at that stage today. But now when you know how you can work with this model, you and your organization can actually be one of those. And maybe we can get that number up a bit. So next year when Gallup does it, it's not 20% anymore. It's hopefully, or 80% disengaged. Maybe it's 50. Who knows? Anyway, I'm going to round it up a little but let me share with you the happiness researcher from Harvard, Sean Aker. He has written a book which is called The Happiness Advantage. And basically what he's saying is conventional wisdom has it all wrong. Because we go around and think that, if I only get that, then I'm going to be happy. If I only achieve this, I'm going to be happy. But research shows that actually it's the other way around. Happiness leads to success, not the other way around. So my last slide here is just like reminding you again of this model. And hopefully you now have some ideas of how you can start working with it as well. And I also want to just remind you of some of the benefits if you do. You get better business performance, higher profitability, higher shareholder return. And as Espen talked about earlier as well, that war of talent is real. And you will attract top talents because these are the kind of organizations people want to work for. And it might sound like a cliche, but it's not, because happy people is good for business. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Annicken. It's been a great pleasure to have you back here after your moderated Oslo Business Forum 2020 as well, the online conference last year. And we will gonna have a Q&A session with you very, very soon. And if you like the presentation from Annicken, I strongly recommend to check out her book, Fly Butterfly. And while we wait for the Q&A session with Annicken, you can now go into Slido and ask your questions to Annicken. And also remember to upvote the best questions that has been asked at Slido. While we wait for that, we have a very good opportunity for you as well. On September 29th this year, we are organizing Oslo Business Forum 2021, Rethinking Business, together with Nordic Business Forum. We have gathered 6 of the greatest speakers in the world to teach you about subjects such as future of work, leadership, culture, and much, much more. I think Espen is going to be there as well, and Dfind and Randstad is going to be partners at the event. And actually, it's going to be a hybrid event with 750 attendees in the conference. However, these tickets have been sold out for a few months already, but more than 1,000 participants have already signed up for an online ticket. And now we recommend you to do the same. So the price for an online ticket is 2,995 Norwegian kroner or 299 euro. But we have an early bird offer, which is now valid for only 1,795 Norwegian kroner. However, since you have signed up for this webinar, we are going to give you an extra discount code, which is valid until 6 p.m. Norwegian time today or 7 p.m. Finnish time. So if you use the discount code CULTURE, you will get an additional discount of 400 Norwegian kroner or 40 euro. And that is valid until 6 p.m. today. So we strongly recommend you to sign up. Yes, let us see if we have gotten some questions through Slido as well. And yes, we have. So please join me back on stage, Annicken.
With pleasure.
So the first question is from Maria. So how to succeed with culture in a remote setup?
Oh, yes, that's a very relevant question. And I hear it a lot. You know what? I come from actually very much a company that was used to working remote. I used to work in the video conferencing industry. In Hamburg, we started with video like early 2000s. And also with Cisco, who is more or less, they have a remote setup. So a lot of the things I learned about how to create culture in a remote setup comes from practical experience of having worked in these kind of companies. And what's extremely important is like when you think about the model, and I talked about the sense of belonging and trust, these are things that actually is a little bit extra challenge when you're working remotely. Because when you're sitting in your office and you just see your colleagues for a little while on the screen, and it gets very task-oriented very often. When you work remotely, people are very much like, okay, now we're going to talk about this and we're going to talk about that. And you just totally miss out on that whole, hey, what are you doing this weekend? And, just like a catch-up and just informal chit-chat. So one of the things we used to do, we arranged like Friday hangouts and just like meeting up and having a culture for just calling each other up. It's like, hey, how are you doing? Want to grab a coffee? A little bit more like making more dynamic remote and not only structure around these meetings. So that was one of the things. And I think also for leaders need to be very aware when they are leading remote teams and need to be much more on and much more reaching out to their team members because they know they're sitting at home and maybe feeling a bit lonely. So they need to, check in and make sure that they are okay. I usually say not only check up, but check in as well.
Nice. And the next question we have from Andreas. So how do you make sure that company culture fit the needs of the local teams when you're part of a global company?
That is also such a good question. And I didn't actually mention that when I talked about the model, but this is something, I don't talk that much about corporate culture. I talk about work culture. It can be team culture. It can be a team of 5. It can be a business unit of 200. It can be a corporation of 70,000. These are human drivers, so it doesn't matter how big it is. What a lot of people I hear people say is like, oh, our culture is like this and this and that, or headquarter in the US say this and this and that, right? But instead say, okay, so this is the global culture. So we're in Norway, or we're in Finland, or we're in UK, or in France, or we're everywhere. And we say, but how are we going to be our best? How are we going to create the best performing cultures? How can we together create that kind of culture? Because by the end of the day, you will be judged by the results you deliver, right? And looking at how you shape that and work with it and say, this is us, this is how we work together. And people talk about like, oh, we have to avoid subcultures. But I say, you don't need to avoid subculture, you need to avoid the word sub and call it team culture instead. And team culture can actually be a really powerful and positive thing because that means you can take ownership for it. So back to that growth mindset, not point fingers, like talk about, oh, the culture is like I want, like, what are we going to do about it? And that's a powerful thing to do. So you can totally do that and build your local culture, your team culture in support of the greater global culture.
Yeah, and you mentioned results, and I think that's a good next question. So how to measure the culture?
Yeah, you know, I think you can measure the culture, but you have to do the work with defining the culture first. Because culture is basically how do you work. So you can measure engagement and you can measure, you know, employee satisfaction, all that. You can only measure culture when you know what you will like. So if you have, for example, you agree that our culture, you know, trust is going to be such an important part of the culture. We often recommend people actually to make, we call it culture code. Like, this is how we do things, right? So you maybe have like 5 culture codes. So we say, okay, we respect each other. That could be a culture code. That you can measure. So then you can do like an employee survey after, you know, every 6 months or something. So do you feel respected? Do you feel we have a respectful culture? You can ask questions like that. Then you can actually measure it. If you think about measure culture as for results, I think the most accurate way of showing that is the things that I shared today, which is the level of high engagement, which is highly correlated to high performance, and that you know, a lot of people are already measuring that, and I think that's an important thing to do.
And you mentioned culture code. One culture code that I have been inspired by is Netflix culture code.
Yes.
And which has been written by and developed, of course, by several years and in front the co-founder Reed Hastings.
Yes.
And it was actually one of the best books written last year, in my opinion, from Erin Meyer, No Rules Rules.
Yes.
She's also coming to Oslo Business Forum in September. So that,
amazing.
That would be great to hear more about. But our next question, are subcultures in an organization negative, or are there situations where they can be productive?
Yes. So again, like as I said earlier, I think we need to avoid the word subculture because it has a negative, you know, feeling of it. Team cultures, definitely, that they can be very productive. So let me give you an example again, like having worked in engineering company with engineering and sales. So naturally, an engineering team will have a very different culture than the sales team. They still work for the same company and they're here for the same purpose and they're proud and they hang, you know, they support each other when need to. But like when you go into an engineering, you know, the engineering floor or the sales floor, it's very different. And it's supposed, it needs to be that way. So I think almost like this whole people saying, okay, this is our culture and this is how it needs to be, can sometimes actually be not positive, because if people are just told how to be instead of being engaged in that process, like, hey, okay, how are we going to work together to be at our very best? You get a whole new conversation. And by the end of the day, again, it is what we achieve. It's the result we produce. That is going to, you know, determine whether we are successful or deemed successful in the company or not, right?
Yeah. So our next, and I think we have time for 2 more questions. But our next question, how can we best connect the business strategy to the culture as strategy?
That's a really good question as well, because to be quite honest with you, I don't see culture strategy that different from business strategy, because the culture strategy is there to support the business strategy. Basically, if you think about, okay, so business strategy, these are the things that we are going to, you know, work. So it's the what, right? This is what we need to do. But how are we going to do that? Well, that's the culture. So that's your culture strategy. So in my opinion, these two, they're just like 100% aligned. And unfortunately, we don't hear that kind of conversation that often. There's a lot of leadership teams that talk about all the what's. We're going to do this, 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 this. Yeah, but how, right? How are we going to work together to make this happen? How can we support our organization so they are able to deliver on these strategies? That's the kind of conversation I'd love to see much more of.
Great. And we have a final question. We have seen an increased rate of resignation during the pandemic and remote work. It has been hard to maintain our culture remote mode. Any recommendations?
You know what? I was working with this leadership team, and they were talking about the same. They had lost people, basically because people felt they didn't like working in the company when it was remote. And people sit there and then they look for, maybe this doesn't feel so good anymore and all that. And then I asked them, so you see people leaving, what are you doing about it? And they were basically saying, well, we're sitting still hoping no one more will leave. And I said, you know what? Maybe this is the time that you step out and say, hey guys, this has happened. We know this is challenging. How can we help you make this better? Engage people. Just like I said earlier, talk with people, listen to people, start that conversation. I don't think there's like one size fits all. Like it's not one solution. But if you go back to the model, it's like if you engage people, if you make them feel, we're part of the purpose, we belong here, there's trust. How can we together create that? I think that is actually the most powerful thing you can do. That, like, talk about the challenge openly, be transparent, because we see like the shift in people when a leader is honest and vulnerable and say, we're losing people and we want to keep you guys. What do you need from us? That just like entirely shifts the whole conversation. And I think that could maybe be like the first thing to do. And then through those conversations, get some ideas on what could be the next steps.
Annicken?
Hope that helps.
I hope so too. I think so. It's been a truly pleasure to have you here.
Thank
you so much for a great keynote and Q&A.
Thank you.
And I hope to see you soon again.
You will, I'm sure. Bye.
And we will soon bring back Espen to try to summarize the learning points and key takeaways from this webinar. But first, if you could rate this webinar from 1 to 10, it's in Slido right now. How likely are you to recommend this webinar to a friend or colleague? It would be really, really helpful if you could get your feedback and rating of this webinar. So please go into Slido and do it right away. And then as you do that, I'll please welcome back Espen here at the stage one more time.
Thank you.
And is it possible to get the sketch notes from our lovely visual designer, Linda in Finland? It's up and running. Perfect. There it is in pink, pink branding. So any comments on the sketch notes, Espen? Does this summarize the presentation from Annicken?
I think it fits very well into what we've heard from Annicken today. As Annicken said, culture is a definition of the feeling of what we do at work, how we work together. And as she said, there's a change, and the changes are coming, and the changes are coming often, and we don't see them come. So we need to be aware of what kind of culture you are building to handle those changes. And then what's interesting is that there are some fundamentals you need in place. So you have to be engaged. You have to be, or try at least to create a kind of happiness and kind of passion and joy for this. And those basics, if you have those down there, there's still quite a lot of different cultures allowed to be successful. And I think that's an interesting part of it, because we see that, and Annicken said that, there's not like this is the typical best culture. There are grown-up or let's say scale-up companies. There are large companies, there are small companies, and some of them are successful and some of them are not. But we see that the size and different way of creating the company, it could be successful even if you have different cultures. But you have to be aware of the following. We are people. We have some things we look for in a culture. Doesn't matter if it's corporate or if it's social at home. We look for a purpose, we look for identity, and we look for the trust. You need to build that into your culture. Then you can put in a lot of challenges, and then you can have the growth, and you can really develop. And on top of that, and I think the most of us feel that, all of us, that if you really develop, you really reach your goals, then comes happiness and passion. And I think that putting all this together, it's of course hard to create the best performing company and culture of the world, but it is possible. And it's just something you can start on today. I like also the kindness part. I think we need to be kind, right? So the old-fashioned cowboy manager just whipping the horse to go faster, sorry, it's not a part of how we run companies these days.
That I have misunderstood. Just kidding. But I really liked your research that you've done, that you presented in the beginning of this webinar as well. And you talked about some differences between the international respondents and the Norwegian ones, which is probably a little bit similar as well to the Nordic countries. So I guess that many of the similar answers would be in Finland or Sweden or Denmark and so on as well. But did you say anything about specific differences when it comes to gender?
No, I didn't, but we have some interesting insights there. Actually, what we've seen this year, and we saw it also last year, is that women find it more important to have attractive benefits and salaries than men. So this is something that I would guess that some people find interesting, and they didn't know this. But we also see that men have other interests when it comes to drivers that we, in a general thinking, thought was typical for women. So you have to dig into the details. You have to look at the different subgroups in such a survey. You will find a lot of interesting things, and I will not tell this today because that's something you have to ask me for.
Nice. So I guess we can find. We will send out in the email tomorrow morning. You can have the recording from the webinar. It's available on the same link that you're watching the webinar now. It will be available, as of my understanding, at least for 1 week. But we'll also send out a link to the survey that you have done in Randstad and Dfind, which has been, I've seen it, and it's some incredible results and some findings that you have there, so which is strongly recommended.
That's true.
So Epsend Steinsrud, National Director of Dfind Norway, thank you so much for joining this webinar and for a great presentation.
Thank you very much, Gustav. Thank you very much. Thank you for everyone watching.
Thank you. And to everyone there watching here today, thank you so much for watching this webinar. Please go into Slido and rate this webinar from 1 to 10. How likely are you to recommend this webinar to a friend or a colleague from 1 to 10? Again, thank you so much and have a great